Officer Daniel Harris had been patrolling the highways outside London for 6 years, and he thought he had seen everything. Drunk drivers, speeders, people running from minor warrants, and the occasional celebrity trying to talk their way out of a ticket. But nothing in his training or experience had prepared him for what was about to happen on this cold November evening. The rain was coming down hard, making the roads slick and visibility poor. Daniel drove slowly along the M4 motorway, his windshield wipers working overtime to keep the glass clear. Traffic was light at this hour, just past 9 in the evening, with most commuters already home and settled in for the night. The headlights of his patrol car cut through the darkness, illuminating the wet pavement ahead. That's when he saw it. A black sedan weaving slightly between lanes. Not dramatically, but enough to catch his attention. The car would drift toward the center line, then correct itself, then drift again. Classic signs of either impaired driving or someone dangerously distracted by their phone. Daniel had pulled over dozens of drivers showing this exact pattern, and it never ended well. He hit his lights and siren, the blue and red flashing, cutting through the rain. For a moment, the black sedan didn't respond, continuing its weaving pattern. Daniel's hand moved instinctively toward his radio, ready to call for backup if this turned into a chase. But then the sedan's brake lights flared red. It began pulling over to the shoulder of the road. Daniel followed, parking his patrol car behind the sedan at a safe distance. He ran the license plate through his system while the rain drummed on his roof. The vehicle came back clean, registered to a private address in London, no warrants or flags. Just a regular car owned by what appeared to be a regular citizen. He grabbed his torch and stepped out into the rain, immediately feeling the cold water soak through his uniform jacket as he approached the driver's side window. His torch illuminating the interior of the car, Daniel went through his standard mental checklist. Watch the hands. Look for weapons. Stay alert for any sudden movements. The window rolled down and Daniel found himself looking at a man in his mid-30s, dressed in civilian clothes but sitting with unnaturally perfect posture. "Good evening, sir," Daniel said, keeping his voice professional and firm. "Do you know why I pulled you over?" The man looked at him with tired, bloodshot eyes. Even in the dim light, Daniel could see that something was wrong. The driver's face was pale, almost gray, and there was a sheen of sweat on his forehead, despite the cold. His hands gripped the steering wheel so tightly that his knuckles had turned white. "I apologize, officer," the man said, his voice strained and difficult. "I know I was weaving. I'm trying to get to the hospital. I think I'm having a heart attack." Daniel's entire demeanor changed in an instant. His hand moved from his belt to the door handle. "Are you experiencing chest pain? Difficulty breathing?" "Yes," the man gasped, one hand moving from the steering wheel to clutch at his chest. "Started about 10 minutes ago. Crushing pressure, pain down my left arm. I know the signs. I just need to get to the hospital." "Sir, you're in no condition to drive," Daniel said, already pulling out his radio. "I'm calling an ambulance right now. Stay in your vehicle. Try to stay calm." But as Daniel raised the radio to his lips, the man shook his head desperately. "No, please. I can't wait for an ambulance. The hospital is only 5 miles ahead. I'm a Royal Guard. I'm trained in emergency protocols. I know my body. I need to get there now." Daniel paused. "A Royal Guard?" He looked at the man more carefully, noting the military bearing despite the obvious pain. The discipline in how he was trying to control his breathing. "Sir, even if you are a guard, you're having a medical emergency. An ambulance is the safest option." "Officer," the man said, and now there was real desperation in his voice. "I'm Sergeant James Mitchell of the Queen's Royal Guard. I've served for 14 years. I know what protocol says, but I also know that every minute matters with a heart attack. The ambulance will take at least 15 minutes to get here, then another 20 to transport me. I could be at the hospital in 10 minutes, if you just let me go." Daniel was torn. Everything in his training said to call the ambulance, secure the scene, follow procedure, but he also saw a man in genuine distress, a man who might not have 15 minutes to wait. He made a decision that would change everything. "You're not driving anywhere in this condition," Daniel said firmly, "but I'll drive you. Get out of the car, move to my patrol vehicle. Now." Sergeant Mitchell didn't argue. He fumbled with his seatbelt, his hands shaking, and stumbled out of the car. Daniel caught him as he nearly fell, feeling the man's weight sagged against him. Together, they made their way to the patrol car, the rain soaking them both. Daniel helped Mitchell into the passenger seat, then ran back to grab the keys from the sedan and lock it. Once behind the wheel of his patrol car, Daniel hit his lights and siren and accelerated back onto the motorway. "What hospital are you trying to reach?" "Royal London," Mitchell gasped, his breathing becoming more labored. "It's the closest. 5 miles ahead, then take the exit for Whitechapel." Daniel drove faster than he normally would, the patrol car's engine roaring as they cut through the rain. He kept glancing at Mitchell, watching the man's condition deteriorate with each passing minute. Mitchell's face had gone from pale to an alarming shade of gray, and he was now clutching his chest with both hands. His jaw clenched against the pain. "Stay with me, Sergeant," Daniel said, trying to keep his voice calm while his own heart raced with adrenaline. "Talk to me. Tell me about the Royal Guard. Keep your mind focused on something other than the pain." Mitchell tried to speak but could only manage a few words between gasping breaths. "Queen's Guard. 14 years. Never missed a day." The man's pride in his service was evident even through his agony, and Daniel felt a surge of determination. He had pulled over what he thought was just another reckless driver. But this was a man who had dedicated his life to service, and Daniel was damned if he was going to let him die on the side of a rainy highway. The hospital exit came into view, and Daniel took it fast, the patrol car's tires squealing slightly as they made the turn. Mitchell was slumped in his seat now, his breathing shallow and rapid. Daniel reached over and grabbed the man's wrist, feeling for a pulse. It was there but weak and irregular. "Almost there," Daniel said, more to himself than to Mitchell. "Just hang on. 2 more minutes." But something strange was happening behind them. Through his rearview mirror, even through the rain and darkness, Daniel could see headlights. Multiple sets of headlights, all moving fast, all heading in their direction. At first he thought it might be other emergency vehicles responding to a call. But there were too many of them, and they were moving in formation, like a convoy. Daniel's radio crackled to life. "Unit 247, this is dispatch. We're receiving multiple reports of a Royal Guard emergency. Can you confirm your status?" Daniel grabbed the radio, confused. "Dispatch. This is 247. I have a man claiming to be Sergeant James Mitchell of the Royal Guard. He's having a heart attack. I'm transporting him to Royal London Hospital now. How do you know about this?" There was a pause. Then the dispatcher's voice came back, and Daniel could hear the confusion in it. "Officer Harris, we've received calls from Buckingham Palace. They're saying that Sergeant Mitchell activated his emergency beacon. The entire regiment is en route to your location." Daniel stared at the radio in his hand, trying to process what the dispatcher had just said. Emergency beacon? Entire regiment. He looked at Mitchell, who had his eyes closed and was breathing in short, painful gasps. The man's right hand was pressed against his chest, but his left hand was clutching something Daniel hadn't noticed before. A small device clipped to his belt that was blinking red. "Sergeant Mitchell," Daniel said urgently, "did you activate some kind of emergency signal?" Mitchell's eyes flickered open, and he nodded weakly. "Standard issue," he managed to whisper. "All active Royal Guards carry them. If we're in danger or have an emergency, we press it. The regiment responds. Always." Daniel's mind raced. He had heard stories about the loyalty among military units, but this was something else entirely. This was a brotherhood that transcended duty and protocol. When one of their own was in trouble, they all came running. Regardless of the circumstances, the hospital was just ahead now. The bright lights of the emergency entrance visible through the rain. Daniel pulled up directly in front of the doors, not bothering with proper parking. He jumped out and ran around to Mitchell's side, yanking the door open. The sergeant was barely conscious now, his skin cold and clammy to the touch. "Help!" Daniel shouted toward the entrance. "I need help. Man, having a heart attack." The automatic doors burst open, and 2 nurses rushed out with a wheelchair. Within seconds, had Mitchell out of the patrol car and were wheeling him inside at a run. Daniel followed, his uniform dripping water across the pristine hospital floor. A doctor in green scrubs met them halfway to the emergency bay. 45-year-old male, chest pain, difficulty breathing, suspected myocardial infarction, one of the nurses rattled off as they moved. Symptoms started approximately 20 minutes ago. The doctor nodded and immediately began barking orders as they pushed through double doors into the emergency room. Daniel tried to follow, but was stopped by a security guard. "I'm sorry, officer, but you'll need to wait here." "Are you family?" "No, I'm the one who brought him in," Daniel explained, still catching his breath. "I pulled him over on the motorway. He's a Royal Guard. There's something you need to know. His unit is on the way here. A lot of them." The security guard looked skeptical. "His unit? What do you mean?" Before Daniel could answer, the sound of engines filled the air outside. Daniel turned and looked through the glass doors to see what could only be described as a military convoy pulling into the hospital parking area. Black SUVs, military vehicles, and at least a dozen motorcycles, all bearing official insignia. Men in uniform began pouring out, and Daniel's stomach dropped as he realized the magnitude of what was happening. A tall man in the distinctive red and gold uniform of a senior Royal Guard strode through the entrance. Water dripping from his ceremonial bearskin cap. His face was stern and authoritative, his bearing that of someone used to command. Behind him came at least 20 other guards, some in full ceremonial uniform, others in tactical gear, all of them with expressions of grim determination. The senior guard's eyes locked onto Daniel immediately. He approached with long, purposeful strides, and Daniel instinctively straightened, his police training kicking in even though he had no authority over these men. "I'm Colonel Richard Ashford, Commander of the Queen's Royal Guard," the man announced, his voice carrying authority that filled the emergency room entrance. "You're the officer who brought Sergeant Mitchell here?" "Yes, sir," Daniel replied, the sir coming automatically, even though he wasn't military. "Officer Daniel Harris, Metropolitan Police?" "I pulled him over for erratic driving, but he was having a heart attack. I transported him here immediately." Colonel Ashford studied Daniel for a moment, his sharp eyes assessing everything from Daniel's soaked uniform to his body language. "You didn't call an ambulance?" "He said he didn't have time to wait, sir. He said the hospital was 5 miles away, and every minute counted. I made the judgment call to transport him myself rather than wait for emergency services." The colonel's expression didn't change, but something shifted in his eyes. "That was good judgment, Officer Harris. Sergeant Mitchell is one of our finest. He has served the Crown with distinction for 14 years. If something happens to him," the sentence hung in the air, unfinished but heavy with meaning. Daniel understood. This wasn't just about a fellow soldier. This was family. The bond between these men went beyond duty or protocol. They had stood together at posts, guarded the royal family together, trusted their lives to each other. When Mitchell had pressed that emergency beacon, he hadn't just been calling for help. He had been reaching out to his brothers. A doctor emerged from the emergency bay, his face serious but composed. Colonel Ashford moved toward him immediately, with Daniel following close behind. "I'm Dr. Patel," the doctor said, addressing the colonel. "I understand you're here for Sergeant Mitchell. How is he?" Ashford demanded, his military bearing barely containing his worry. "He's alive, but it was close. He's having a significant myocardial infarction, what most people call a heart attack. The blockage is severe, and we need to perform emergency surgery immediately to place stents and restore blood flow. The next few hours are critical. Will he survive?" One of the guards behind Ashford asked, his voice breaking slightly. Dr. Patel looked at the assembled guards, seeming to understand the depth of their concern. "I won't lie to you. It's serious. But he got here quickly, and that makes a significant difference. If he had been much later, if he had waited for an ambulance, or tried to drive himself the full distance," the doctor glanced at Daniel. "Officer, your decision to bring him here likely saved his life." Daniel felt a wave of relief wash over him, but he also felt the weight of responsibility. If he had made a different choice, if he had followed standard protocol and waited for the ambulance, Mitchell might already be dead. Colonel Ashford turned to Daniel, and for the first time, his stern expression softened slightly. "Officer Harris, on behalf of the Queen's Royal Guard and His Majesty's service, I want to thank you. You showed quick thinking and compassion when it mattered most. Well, I just did what anyone would do, sir, Daniel said, feeling uncomfortable with the praise. No, Ashford replied firmly. Most officers would have followed procedure. They would have called the ambulance and waited. You assessed the situation, recognized the urgency, and took action. That kind of judgment under pressure is what separates adequate officers from exceptional ones. The other guards murmured their agreement, and Daniel felt his face flush with a mixture of embarrassment and pride. He had spent 6 years doing this job, handling routine traffic stops and minor incidents, sometimes wondering if he was making any real difference. But tonight, in the rain on a dark motorway, he had made a choice that saved a life. A nurse approached the group. Excuse me, but we need to prep Sergeant Mitchell for surgery. Only one person can see him briefly before we take him in. He's asking for Colonel Ashford. The colonel nodded and followed the nurse, but he paused at the door to the emergency bay and looked back at Daniel. Officer Harris, don't leave. Sergeant Mitchell will want to thank you himself when he wakes up. That is, if you're willing to wait. Daniel glanced at his watch. His shift had technically ended an hour ago, and he was soaked, cold, and exhausted. But looking at these men, seeing their brotherhood and loyalty, he knew there was nowhere else he should be. I'll wait. Sir, Daniel said. Colonel Ashford nodded with approval and disappeared through the doors. The remaining guards filled the waiting area, some sitting, others standing at attention as if they were still on duty. Daniel found a chair near the window and sat down, watching the rain continue to fall outside. His radio crackled with traffic from other units, normal patrol business, but it all seemed distant and unimportant now. One of the younger guards approached Daniel, probably only in his early 20s. Officer, I'm Private Thomas Webb. I trained with Sergeant Mitchell. He's the one who taught me everything I know about the Guard. He's always been there for all of us. How long have you known him? Daniel asked. 3 years. He was my mentor when I first joined. The man is a legend in our regiment. Never complains, never shows weakness, always leads by example. Thomas's voice wavered slightly. I've never seen him sick or hurt. He's like he's indestructible. It's hard to believe this is happening. Daniel understood. Heroes weren't supposed to have heart attacks. They weren't supposed to be vulnerable or human. But Mitchell was human, and tonight that humanity had almost killed him. The hours dragged by slowly in the hospital waiting room. Daniel had called his sergeant to explain the situation, expecting to be ordered back on duty. Instead, his sergeant told him to stay as long as necessary and to keep dispatch updated on Mitchell's condition. Apparently, word had spread quickly through the Metropolitan Police about the Royal Guard having a heart attack, and there was significant interest in how the situation developed. Colonel Ashford had returned from his brief visit with Mitchell before surgery, his face drawn and tired. He sat down heavily in one of the plastic chairs, and Daniel noticed for the first time how the ceremonial uniform, so impressive and formal, seemed almost absurd in the harsh fluorescent lights of a hospital waiting room. He was conscious when I saw him, Ashford said to the assembled guards, his voice carrying clearly despite his evident fatigue. He wanted me to tell all of you that he's sorry for causing such a fuss. Those were his exact words. Here he is, fighting for his life, and he's worried about inconveniencing us. Several of the guards smiled sadly at that. It was exactly the kind of thing Mitchell would say, putting others before himself, even in his darkest moment. He also said something else, Ashford continued, and now he looked directly at Daniel. He said to tell the police officer thank you. He said, you could have arrested him, could have followed the rules, could have made things difficult. But instead, you listened, you made a human choice, and you gave him a chance. Daniel swallowed hard, feeling the weight of those words. I'm glad I could help, sir. As the night wore on, more people began arriving at the hospital. Mitchell's wife, Emma, appeared around midnight, her face pale with terror. She had been at a conference in Scotland and had caught the first flight back when she received the news. Colonel Ashford met her at the entrance and spoke with her quietly before escorting her to a private waiting room where family could have more privacy. But before she disappeared, Emma stopped in front of Daniel. You're the officer who brought my husband here? Yes, ma'am, Daniel replied, standing up respectfully. Emma took his hands in hers, her eyes brimming with tears. Thank you. Thank you for not waiting, for not following whatever rules you were supposed to follow. Thank you for seeing my husband as a person who needed help, not just another case to process. Thank you for giving him a fighting chance. Her words broke something inside Daniel, and he felt his own eyes sting with unexpected emotion. He's going to make it, ma'am. He's strong, and he's getting the best care. I know, Emma said, though her voice suggested she was trying to convince herself as much as him. James is a fighter. He always has been. But even fighters need someone to get them to the battlefield. She squeezed his hands once more before following Colonel Ashford to the family waiting area. Around 2 a.m. Dr. Patel emerged from the surgical wing. Still in his scrubs, a surgical mask hanging around his neck. The entire waiting room came to attention, guards and officer alike, standing as if called to formation. The surgery was successful, Dr. Patel announced, and a collective exhale of relief swept through the room. We placed 3 stents to open the blocked arteries. Sergeant Mitchell's heart has sustained some damage, but he's alive and stable. The next 24 hours will be critical for monitoring, but I'm cautiously optimistic about his recovery. Can we see him? Colonel Ashford asked. Not yet. He's in recovery now and will be moved to intensive care within the hour. Family can see him first, then we can allow brief visits from others. But he needs rest, gentlemen. His body has been through significant trauma. The doctor left, and the tension that had held the room hostage for hours finally began to dissipate. Some of the guards embraced each other. Others simply sat down heavily, the relief making their legs weak. Private Webb wiped tears from his eyes unashamedly. No one thought less of him for it. Colonel Ashford addressed the assembled group. Right, Webb? Daniels, Chen, you're on first rotation. Go home, get some sleep, come back in 8 hours. Everyone else, stagger your visits throughout the day. I don't want the entire regiment descending on this hospital at once. Mitchell's alive because of quick action and good medical care. Let's not undo that by overwhelming him or the hospital staff. The guards began organizing themselves with military efficiency, creating a rotation schedule that would ensure Mitchell always had someone from his unit nearby. Daniel watched this display of loyalty and organization with admiration. These weren't just colleagues. They were a family in the truest sense of the word, as some of the guards began leaving. Colonel Ashford approached Daniel once more. Officer Harris, you should go home. Get some rest. You've been here for 5 hours, and I'm sure you have another shift soon. Actually, sir, I'm off for the next 2 days, Daniel replied. I'd like to stay at least until I can speak with Sergeant Mitchell, if that's all right. Ashford studied him with those sharp, assessing eyes. You're not obligated to stay, officer. You've done more than enough, I know, sir. But I'd like to see this through. I pulled him over thinking he was just another reckless driver. I want him to know that I'm glad I was wrong, and that I'm glad he's going to be okay. The colonel nodded slowly. Very well, but at least let me get you some coffee, and perhaps a dry uniform from our stores. You've been sitting in wet clothes for hours. Daniel hadn't even noticed how cold he was until Ashford mentioned it. Now that the adrenaline had worn off, he realized he was shivering. Coffee would be great, sir. Thank you, one of the guards, a corporal named Stevens, was dispatched to get coffee and returned with not just drinks, but also sandwiches from the hospital cafeteria. Can't have our hero passing out from hunger, Stevens said with a slight smile, handing Daniel a wrapped sandwich. I'm not a hero, Daniel protested. I just drove a man to the hospital. You made a choice, Stevens replied seriously. In that moment on the motorway, you could have chosen safety, protocol, and covering yourself. Instead, you chose to help someone in need, even though it meant taking a risk. That's the definition of heroism, officer. Small moments where ordinary people do extraordinary things. Around 4 a.m, a nurse came to tell them that Mitchell was awake and asking for his wife. Emma went in first, and when she emerged 20 minutes later, she was smiling through her tears. He's weak, but he's talking. He wants to see Colonel Ashford and the officer who brought him here. Daniel followed Ashford through the intensive care unit. past machines that beeped and hummed, past other patients fighting their own battles. They arrived at Mitchell's room, and through the window, Daniel could see the sergeant lying in bed, surrounded by monitors and 4 lines. He looked pale and fragile. Nothing like the disciplined soldier Daniel had encountered on the highway. They entered quietly, and Mitchell's eyes opened. When he saw them, a weak smile crossed his face. "Colonel," he said, his voice raspy and tired, "I apologize for the disruption to the regiment's schedule." "Shut up, James," Ashford said, but there was affection in his voice. "You scared the hell out of all of us. 23 men showed up at this hospital tonight." 23? Do you know what kind of paperwork that's going to create? Mitchell's smile widened slightly. "Sorry, sir." Then his eyes found Daniel, and something like recognition and gratitude filled his expression. "You're the officer. The one who pulled me over." "Yes, sir," Daniel replied, moving closer to the bed. "Officer Daniel Harris. I'm glad you're okay. You saved my life," Mitchell said simply. "The doctor told me that if I had been even 10 minutes later, I probably wouldn't have made it. You broke protocol to help a stranger. That takes courage." "You would have done the same, sir," Daniel replied. Maybe Mitchell acknowledged. "But you're the one who actually did it. You're the one who listened when I said I didn't have time to wait. You trusted my judgment, even though you had every reason to doubt it. That means something, officer. That means everything." Over the following days, Daniel found himself drawn back to the hospital repeatedly. His 2 days off stretched into visits during his free time, checking on Mitchell's progress and, if he was honest with himself, drawn to the camaraderie of the Royal Guards who maintained their constant vigil. The waiting room had become an unofficial gathering place for off-duty guards, who would stop by to check on their sergeant, share stories, and maintain the brotherhood that defined their service. Mitchell's recovery was steady but slow. The damage to his heart had been significant, and the doctors were cautious about his prognosis. He would need months of cardiac rehabilitation, lifestyle changes, and close monitoring. But he was alive, his humor intact, and his spirit unbroken. On the 3rd day after the surgery, Colonel Ashford approached Daniel with an unusual request. "Officer Harris, the Queen has been informed of what happened. She would like to meet you." Daniel nearly dropped his coffee. "The Queen? Your Majesty wants to meet me?" "Her Majesty takes a personal interest in the welfare of her guards," Ashford explained. "When she learned that one of her longest-serving guards nearly died, but was saved by a police officer's quick thinking, she insisted on expressing her gratitude personally. This isn't optional, officer. This is a royal summons." 2 days later, Daniel found himself standing outside Buckingham Palace in his dress uniform, which he had hastily cleaned and pressed the night before. His hands were sweating despite the cold November air, and his stomach felt like it was doing acrobatics. He had grown up in working-class London, never imagining he would be anywhere near royalty, let alone meeting the Queen. Colonel Ashford met him at the gate and escorted him through the palace grounds. The beauty and grandeur of the place overwhelmed Daniel. From the perfectly manicured gardens to the historical portraits lining the corridors, they walked in silence until they reached a smaller, more intimate sitting room where the Queen waited. She was smaller than Daniel had expected, but her presence filled the room with an authority that needed no ceremony or pomp. She stood as he entered, which surprised him, and extended her hand. "Officer Harris," she said warmly, "thank you for coming. Please, sit down." Daniel sat carefully on the edge of an antique chair, terrified he might break something priceless. The Queen settled across from him with the ease of someone completely comfortable in her surroundings. "I wanted to thank you personally for what you did for Sergeant Mitchell," she began. "James has served my family for 14 years with absolute dedication. He has stood guard during some of our most important state functions, has protected my grandchildren during public appearances, and has never once faltered in his duty. To know that his life was saved by someone like you, someone who saw past protocol to the human need before them, that means a great deal to me, Your Majesty." "I only did what seemed right at the time," Daniel managed, his voice sounding strange to his own ears in this formal setting. "Perhaps," the Queen replied, "but doing what seems right is often the most difficult choice. It would have been easier, safer, and more conventional to call an ambulance and wait. You could have protected yourself from any potential criticism or liability, but you didn't. You took a risk because someone needed help. That speaks to your character, officer. She paused, and a small smile played at her lips. I understand you've been visiting James regularly at the hospital. His wife tells me you've become quite popular with the guards. Daniel felt his face flush. They're good men, Your Majesty. It's been an honor to get to know them. They think highly of you as well, the Queen said. Colonel Ashford has spoken very highly of your conduct. In fact, he's made a suggestion that I find quite interesting. She reached for a folder on the table beside her and opened it. The royal household employs a number of police officers as protection officers, liaisons, and security consultants. These positions require not just skill and training, but also good judgment, discretion, and the ability to see situations from multiple perspectives. Colonel Ashford believes you would be well suited for such a role. Daniel's mind went blank. Was the Queen offering him a job? Of course, this would be entirely your choice, the Queen continued. You have a career with the Metropolitan Police, and I understand you're well regarded there. But if you were interested, we would be honored to have you join our security team. You've already proven yourself to be someone who can be trusted in critical moments. I don't know what to say, Your Majesty, Daniel stammered. Say you'll think about it, the Queen replied kindly. There's no pressure, and no offense will be taken if you decline. But the offer is genuine, and it will remain open. The meeting lasted another 20 minutes, with the Queen asking about Daniel's background, his career, his family. She was remarkably easy to talk to once his initial nervousness faded, showing genuine interest in his life and experiences. When he finally left the palace, his head was spinning with the impossibility of what had just happened. That evening, Daniel visited Mitchell at the hospital, finding him sitting up in bed and looking significantly better than he had days earlier. His color had returned, and while he was still surrounded by monitors, he seemed more like himself. I heard you met Her Majesty, Mitchell said with a knowing smile. How did that go? Surreal, Daniel admitted. She offered me a job. I know. I recommended you for it. Daniel stared at him. You did? Mitchell nodded. After you saved my life, I started asking around about you. Talked to your sergeant, looked at your record. You're a good officer, Daniel. You care about people, not just about closing cases or getting commendations. That's rare. That's valuable. The royal household needs people like you. I don't know if I'm qualified, Daniel said honestly. I'm just a traffic officer. You were never just anything, Mitchell replied firmly. You proved that on the motorway. You saw a situation, assessed it correctly, and took decisive action. That's what we need. Not someone who follows orders blindly, but someone who can think, who can see the human element in every situation. Daniel sat down in the chair beside the bed. I need time to think about it. Of course you do. It's a big decision, Mitchell acknowledged. But whatever you decide, know that you've earned the respect and gratitude of the entire Queen's Royal Guard. You're one of us now. Whether you wear the uniform or not, over the next week, Daniel wrestled with the decision. He loved his job with the Metropolitan Police, loved the variety and challenge of patrol work, but the opportunity to work with the royal household, to be part of something larger and more significant, that was appealing in ways he hadn't expected. He talked to his family, his friends, his sergeant. Everyone had opinions, but in the end they all said the same thing. This was his decision, and whatever he chose, they would support him. Mitchell was discharged from the hospital after 2 weeks, with strict orders for rest and rehabilitation. The day he left, the entire available regiment showed up to escort him home, creating a convoy that must have looked absurd to other hospital patients, felt absolutely right to those involved. Daniel was there too, and as Mitchell was wheeled out to the waiting car, he stopped beside Daniel and extended his hand. Have you made your decision? Mitchell asked. Daniel took his hand and smiled. I'm accepting the position. Mitchell's face broke into a broad grin. Outstanding. Welcome to the family, Officer. Or should I say, Protection Officer Harris. The transition from Metropolitan Police Patrol Officer to Royal Protection Officer was more challenging than Daniel had anticipated. The training was intense and comprehensive. covering everything from advanced defensive driving to diplomatic protocol. From threat assessment to the intricate workings of the royal household, he spent 6 weeks in intensive courses, learning skills he never knew existed. Colonel Ashford personally oversaw part of his training, which both honored and terrified Daniel. The colonel was exacting in his standards, accepting nothing less than perfection. But he was also fair, taking time to explain not just the how of each procedure, but the why behind it. "You're not just learning to protect bodies," Ashford told him during one training session. "You're protecting an institution that represents continuity, stability, and national identity. Every decision you make, every action you take, reflects on the crown itself. That's the weight you'll carry." Sergeant Mitchell, though, still recovering and unable to return to active duty, visited the training facility regularly. He had been placed on light administrative duties while his heart healed. Working with the regimental command to coordinate schedules and manage logistics, Daniel often found Mitchell watching his training exercises, offering quiet words of encouragement or subtle corrections. "You're doing well, Mitchell," told him after a particularly grueling defensive tactics session. "Better than most recruits at this stage. You have good instincts." "I don't feel like I'm doing well," Daniel admitted, wiping sweat from his forehead. "Every day I discover 10 new things I don't know." "It's called learning," Mitchell replied with a slight smile. "The officers who worry me are the ones who think they know everything. You're smart enough to recognize how much you don't know. That's a strength, not a weakness." During his training, Daniel continued to see the bonds that connected the Royal Guards and protection officers. They operated as a unit, watching out for each other, covering weaknesses, and celebrating strengths. It was different from the Metropolitan Police, where officers worked more independently. Here, everything was interconnected, and failure by one person could compromise everyone. Private Webb, who had been so emotional at the hospital, took Daniel under his wing during weapons training. "The key is consistency," Webb explained as they stood at the firing range. "Not just hitting the target, but hitting it the same way every time. In a real situation, you need muscle memory so complete that you don't have to think. You just act." Daniel appreciated the guidance. Despite being older than many of the guards, he felt like a student again, humble and eager to learn. The guards could have resented him for getting a position through circumstances rather than years of military service, but they didn't. They accepted him because Mitchell had vouched for him. And because he had proven his character on that rainy night, 3 months into his new position, Daniel received his first official assignment. He would be part of the security detail for a state dinner at Buckingham Palace, a relatively low-risk assignment perfect for someone still learning the ropes. His role would be to monitor one of the side entrances, coordinate with other officers via radio, and watch for anything unusual. The night of the dinner, Daniel stood in his new uniform, feeling both proud and nervous. The palace was transformed for the event, with flowers, lights, and staff moving with choreographed precision. Dignitaries from around the world arrived in expensive cars, wearing formal attire that probably cost more than Daniel's annual salary. "Colonel?" Ashford stopped by Daniel's post during his rounds. "How are you holding up, Harris?" "Nervous, sir," Daniel admitted, trying not to show it. "Good. Healthy nervousness keeps you alert. Overconfidence makes you sloppy." Ashford paused, looking at the arriving guests. "You belong here, Harris. Don't doubt that. You earned this position through character and action, not privilege or connections. That makes you more valuable than you realize." The dinner passed without incident, which was exactly how it should have been. Daniel's job was to ensure nothing happened and nothing did. But being part of that machine, that coordinated effort to protect and serve, gave him a sense of purpose he had never felt before. After the event, as staff cleaned up and guests departed, Daniel found Mitchell in one of the administrative offices, reviewing schedules for the following week. The sergeant looked tired but content, his health slowly improving, though he still moved more carefully than before. "Your first state dinner," Mitchell said when he saw Daniel. "How did it feel?" "Intimidating. Exciting. Overwhelming," Daniel replied, sitting down across from him. "Is it always like this?" "The nerves fade with experience, but the sense of responsibility never does," Mitchell said. "That's good." The day you stop feeling the weight of what you're protecting is the day you should find another job. Daniel nodded, understanding. Can I ask you something? That night on the motorway, when you pressed the emergency beacon, did you know the entire regiment would respond? Mitchell thought about the question carefully. I knew someone would come. That's how it works. When one of us is in trouble, the others respond. Always. It's not written in any manual or regulation. It's just understood. We take care of our own. But you didn't need them for the medical emergency, Daniel pointed out. I was already taking you to the hospital. True, Mitchell acknowledged. But I pressed it anyway because I needed them to know. I needed them to be there, even if it was just to wait in a hospital room. Because that's what family does. They show up even when there's nothing practical they can do. Especially then. The wisdom in those words struck Daniel deeply. In his years as a patrol officer, he had worked alone most of the time, handling situations independently, relying on himself. But here, in this new role, he was learning that strength came from connection, from knowing others had your back, from being part of something larger than yourself. Over the following months, Daniel's confidence grew. He worked more assignments, learned from his mistakes, and built relationships with the other officers and guards. He discovered he had a talent for reading situations, for noticing details that others missed. His years of patrol experience, of dealing with unpredictable people in unpredictable situations, served him well in this new environment. Mitchell's recovery continued. Though doctors made it clear he would never return to active duty as a Royal Guard, the physical demands were too great for someone with a damaged heart. But the regiment found other ways to use his experience and knowledge. He became an instructor, teaching new recruits about protocol, discipline, and the honor of service. I'm grateful. Actually, Mitchell told Daniel one evening as they shared a quiet moment in the palace gardens, the heart attack was terrifying, and I wouldn't wish it on anyone. But it forced me to slow down, to appreciate things I had been taking for granted. My wife, my health, the people around me. I was so focused on duty that I forgot to actually live. Do you regret anything? Daniel asked. Mitchell considered this. I regret not listening to my body sooner. The warning signs were there for months. The fatigue, the occasional chest discomfort, the shortness of breath. I ignored all of it because I thought I was invincible, or at least that admitting weakness would be a failure. That almost killed me. He turned to look at Daniel directly. Don't make that mistake, Harris. This job demands a lot from you, and it's easy to give everything until there's nothing left. But you have to take care of yourself, too. You have to recognize when you need help, when you need rest, when you need to step back. That's not weakness. That's wisdom. Daniel took the advice to heart. He made sure to maintain connections outside of work, to see his family regularly, to pursue hobbies and interests that had nothing to do with royal protection. He ran regularly, ate well, and paid attention to his health in ways he never had before. A year after that fateful night on the motorway, the regiment held a special ceremony. Mitchell was being officially retired from active service, though he would continue his role as an instructor. The entire regiment attended, along with senior palace officials, and, to everyone's surprise, the Queen herself. Daniel stood with the other protection officers as colonel. Ashford spoke about Mitchell's years of service. His dedication, his sacrifice, and his embodiment of everything the Queen's Royal Guard represented. When Mitchell received his retirement medals and commendations, the applause was thunderous and genuine. After the ceremony ended, and the formal proceedings gave way to a more relaxed reception, the Queen asked to speak with both Mitchell and Daniel privately. They followed her to a small study where she gestured for them to sit. James, the Queen began, addressing Mitchell with the familiarity that came from years of service. Your retirement is well earned, but I hope you understand how much you'll be missed in active service. You've been a constant presence, a steady hand, and an example to everyone around you. Thank you, Your Majesty, Mitchell replied, his voice thick with emotion. Serving you and your family has been the greatest honor of my life. The Queen smiled warmly, then turned to Daniel. And Officer Harris, you've completed your first year with us. Colonel Ashford tells me you've exceeded all expectations. Your performance reviews are exceptional, and more importantly, you've earned the respect of some very difficult-to-impress people. Daniel felt his face warm with the praise. I've had excellent teachers, Your Majesty. Indeed you have, the Queen agreed. But you brought something unique to this role. You brought perspective from outside our usual circles, experience from the streets rather than the parade grounds. That diversity of backgrounds strengthens our entire security apparatus. She paused, looking between the two men with an expression that was both formal and genuinely warm. What happened on that motorway a year ago could have ended in tragedy. Instead, it became the beginning of something positive. James, you survived because someone made a human choice over a procedural one. Daniel, you found your calling because you were willing to take a risk for someone you didn't know. That's the kind of story I like, where crisis leads to growth rather than just loss. After leaving the Queen's presence, Mitchell and Daniel walked through the palace corridors together. It was late afternoon, and the golden light streaming through the tall windows created patterns on the polished floors. I never thanked you properly, Mitchell said suddenly, stopping to face Daniel. I thanked you at the hospital, and I recommended you for this position. But I never really expressed what that night meant to me. James, you don't need to, Daniel started. But Mitchell held up his hand. Let me say this, Mitchell insisted. When I pressed that emergency beacon, I knew my brothers would come. That's our code, our bond. But what I didn't expect was a stranger to show the same kind of loyalty and care. You had no obligation to me. You could have followed procedure, protected yourself, and no one would have blamed you. But you didn't. You saw a man in trouble, and you helped him. Consequences be damned. Mitchell's voice wavered slightly. My daughter is 10 years old. Because of you, I got to see her grow up. I'll walk her down the aisle someday, meet my grandchildren, grow old with my wife. All of that is possible because you made a choice in the rain on a dark road. How do you thank someone for giving you your future back? Daniel felt his own throat tighten. You thank them by living that future well, by being there for your daughter, by teaching the next generation of guards, by continuing to make a difference. That's thanks enough. The two men embraced, the formal distance between officer and sergeant dissolving in the genuine affection of friendship. When they separated, both were wiping their eyes, neither embarrassed by the emotion. Come on, Mitchell said, his voice lighter now. Emma is hosting a small gathering at our house tonight to celebrate my retirement. You're expected to be there, and she won't take no for an answer. The party at Mitchell's home that evening was intimate and warm, filled with guards, protection officers, and their families. Daniel met Mitchell's daughter, Sophie, a bright and energetic girl who immediately demanded he tell her stories about being a protection officer. Mitchell's wife, Emma, hugged Daniel tightly when she saw him, whispering another thank you that needed no elaboration. As the evening progressed and the wine flowed more freely, the stories began. Guards shared tales of Mitchell's years of service, some funny, some touching, all of them revealing a man who had dedicated his life to duty while never losing his humanity. Private Webb, now promoted to corporal, told a story about how Mitchell had helped him through a difficult period when Webb's mother was ill. He covered my shifts, helped me arrange leave, and never asked for anything in return. That's who he is. That's who he's always been. Colonel Ashford, who had loosened his collar and was more relaxed than Daniel had ever seen him, raised his glass. To Sergeant James Mitchell, a soldier's soldier, a leader's leader, and a reminder to all of us that service means sacrifice, but it also means caring for the people beside you. The regiment is lesser without you on active duty, James, but richer for having you as part of our history. Everyone drank to that, and Mitchell stood to respond. I've had a good career, he said simply. I've served a queen I respect, worked with men I admire, and protected a family I've come to care about deeply. The heart attack was a wake-up call, a reminder that we're all mortal, all vulnerable. But it also showed me something beautiful. It showed me that brotherhood is real, that loyalty isn't just a word, and that sometimes strangers become family. He looked directly at Daniel. This man here, he saved my life. But more than that, he reminded all of us what really matters. Not protocol, not regulations, not even duty in its strictest sense. What matters is seeing people as people, recognizing when someone needs help, and having the courage to act. That's a lesson I'll carry with me for whatever years I have left." The party continued late into the night, and when Daniel finally left, he felt something he hadn't experienced in a long time. He felt like he belonged, like he had found not just a job, but a purpose, not just colleagues, but a family. 5 years later, Daniel stood in the same palace gardens where he had once talked with Mitchell about regrets and wisdom. He was now a senior protection officer, responsible for coordinating security details and training new recruits. Mitchell still worked as an instructor, his health stable, his spirits high. His influence on the regiment as strong as ever. They met regularly. These two men whose lives had intersected on a rainy night and been forever changed by it. Sometimes they discussed work, sometimes family, sometimes they just enjoyed comfortable silence together. "I've been thinking," Mitchell said during one of these meetings, "about that emergency beacon, about how the entire regiment showed up at the hospital. I still remember the shock of seeing all those vehicles pull into the parking area." Daniel replied with a smile. "It wasn't just about me," Mitchell continued. "The beacon represents something bigger. It says that no one faces their battles alone, that we're connected by bonds stronger than blood." When I pressed it, I was calling for my brothers. "But what I found was that brotherhood extends beyond uniforms and titles." You proved that, Daniel. You proved that the human capacity for compassion and courage exists everywhere and everyone willing to act on it. Daniel nodded, understanding the deeper meaning. "I was just a traffic cop doing his job." "No," Mitchell corrected gently. "You were a good man faced with a choice, and you chose correctly. That's all any of us can do. Face the choices that come our way and try to choose correctly, even when it's hard, even when it's risky, even when it goes against what's safe or expected." The sun was setting over the palace grounds, painting the sky in shades of orange and gold. Daniel thought about that night 5 years ago, about the rain and the darkness, and the decision he had made in a moment of pressure. He thought about how one choice, one human connection, had rippled outward, changing not just his life, but the lives of everyone connected to him. "You know what I learned from all this?" Daniel said finally. "I learned that the most important moments in life often look like ordinary moments at the time. A traffic stop, a conversation, a decision to help someone in need. We don't get dramatic music or clear signs that say, 'This moment matters.' We just get choices. And we have to trust ourselves to make the right ones." Mitchell smiled. That knowing smile of someone who understood exactly what Daniel meant. That's wisdom, my friend. Real wisdom. And that's why you're good at this job. Why you'll continue to be good at it. Because you understand that every moment matters. Every person matters. And every choice we make shapes the world around us. They stood together in the fading light. Two men from different backgrounds who had found friendship in the most unlikely circumstances. The palace behind them represented tradition, history, and duty. But in that garden, in that quiet moment, they represented something equally important, the human connections that make duty meaningful, the compassion that gives tradition its heart, and the courage to choose people over protocol when it truly matters. The emergency beacon that brought the regiment to the hospital that night had been a call for help, but it had also been something more. It had been a reminder that none of us face our challenges alone. That help comes from expected and unexpected places, and that sometimes the stranger who pulls you over on a rainy night becomes the brother who stands beside you for the rest of your life. That was the real story, Daniel realized. Not just about a traffic stop or a heart attack or a job change. It was about human beings recognizing each other's humanity, about brotherhood that transcends institutions, and about the simple but profound truth that we're all connected in ways we don't always see until crisis makes those connections visible. And somewhere in London, on highways and streets where officers still patrol and guards still serve, the same choices are being made every day. Choices between protocol and compassion, between safety and service, between following rules and following conscience. Most of those choices never make headlines or lead to ceremonies at palaces. But they matter. They all matter. Every single one of them shapes the world in small but significant ways. It's creating ripples that spread farther than anyone might imagine. That night on the M4 motorway had taught Daniel Harris that lesson, and it was a lesson he would carry with him, teach to others, and honor through his actions for the rest of his life.